Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started.
I imitated his high-pitched voice in front of our friends, and, no shock here, it made its way back to him. Now, on their advice, I'm writing this on Reddit, supposedly to gain some perspective, as they phrased it. They think I'm the unreasonable one, which I find hard to accept. Maybe I did push it a little too far, but I'm not entirely to blame here, and it feels absurd to think our whole marriage might end over something so minor. I could really use some guidance on this. For a little context, I'm Grace, and my husband, let's call him Levi, and I have been married for 8 years. Until now, I thought we had a pretty solid relationship. I'd say we had a good thing going, or at least, that's what I believed. Levi is a deeply sensitive guy, not always the easiest to understand, and he's got a few quirks I've generally found pretty amusing. One of those quirks is his unusually high voice, which to me just adds to his uniqueness. I thought it was something we could laugh about together. I had no idea he felt so strongly about it. He's never really given me any reason to think it was a sore point. Occasionally, if I laughed too hard, he'd make a comment, but I always figured he was just being his usual sensitive self. I honestly didn't think he cared all that much since he didn't often bring it up. My friends think I'm oblivious and even harsh in how I've treated him. Sure, I joke about his voice from time to time, but it's funny to me. And not just to me. My friends laugh too, so I know I'm not alone in this yes, I've made fun of other things, like his hobbies or the little things he worries about. Who wouldn't? He can get worked up over the smallest issues, and sometimes I feel like I need to point it out, help him snap back to reality. Maybe my friends think I'm trying to defend myself, but I'm honestly just laying it all out here. I want my friends, and all of you, to understand that I'm not holding back or covering up. Sure, I've made jokes about his birdwatching hobby or downplayed his anxieties here and there. I might have even brushed off some of his accomplishments, but I always tried to keep it light or add a bit of tough love. My intent was to help him build a thicker skin and handle life with a bit more resilience. There's more to this than just the jokes. In arguments, I've pointed out his emotional side because, honestly, he can be intense. I'll admit that I've teased him about his looks or questioned why he needs so much reassurance. And yes, I've used sarcasm when he gets overly romantic, especially when he does those over-the-top, cheesy things. It's hard not to laugh. I realize now that I might have embarrassed him in front of others, or made him feel small about his choices, but I genuinely thought I was grounding him, giving him a reality check. It never occurred to me that he might need constant reassurance or a softer touch. I'm just not someone who sugarcoats things, and I didn't think he'd take my words so seriously. Besides, whenever I joked about his voice, everyone, including our friends, would laugh with me. Levi usually chuckled too, so I assumed he found it funny as well. To me, it was all harmless fun, and his laughter seemed like a sign that he saw it that way too. Isn't this something couples do? Tease each other a bit? Sometimes he'd bring it up later, maybe when we were alone, saying things like, "I wish you wouldn't joke about that," or asking, "Do you really think it's that funny?" He seemed a bit serious, but I just figured it was part of his sensitivity. I thought he'd either outgrow it or, in time, laugh along with me. I never really stopped to consider that he might not be able to simply brush off my comments. I figured I wasn't saying anything harsh enough to sting, right? Lots of couples joke around, even tease each other about quirks and personality traits. I thought we were in that same lighthearted zone. Teasing him about his voice or sensitivity seemed like harmless fun to me, not something that would genuinely upset him. And if it truly bothered him, wouldn't he have said something more obvious, made it clear to me? I always assumed he'd speak up if I went too far. In hindsight, though, there were times he looked a bit wounded. But I brushed those looks aside, telling myself he'd let it slide, and that he wasn't the type to hold on to things. It didn't cross my mind that my words might slowly be wearing him down. Since he rarely brought it up, I took that as a sign it wasn't a big deal. Being the jokester has always been part of who I am. I can't understand why this one small comment has him so upset. Humor is my way of dealing with things, of lightening the mood. It's just me. So, the other night I was hanging out with friends, joking around as usual, and at one point, I thought of his voice. I didn't plan it, it just came up in the moment. So, I said something about how he sounds a bit like a chipmunk when he gets excited. We laughed because, come on, it's true, and it was just funny. It was just a throwaway comment, not meant to be mean. And he wasn't even there. It was just between my friends and me, not even his friends, so I thought it would stay in that space. Just some casual fun. But somehow, one of them must have told him. Now he's furious, giving me the cold shoulder like I've done something unforgivable. I'm genuinely taken aback by his reaction. I never imagined he felt so strongly about it, and to me, it just seems over the top. When he confronted me, he acted like I'd done something huge, as if I'd crossed a serious boundary. He's talking about it like it's the end of the world, even saying it's jeopardizing our marriage, which feels way out of proportion. I didn't cheat on him. I didn't deceive him. It was a harmless joke about his voice, nothing more. I didn't think he would care so much because, honestly, he's always been a bit on the sensitive side. I get that. But now he's saying he needs space and claiming he's deeply hurt. To me, it all feels so blown out of proportion, and it's honestly upsetting. What's worse, my friends are taking his side, acting like I did something terrible. Now, I'm the one who's feeling hurt, frustrated, and confused by this whole situation. I know he's sensitive, but this reaction feels like it's coming out of nowhere. I love him. I really do. But it seems like this whole thing is being made into something way bigger than it is. All I want is for him to see that it's not as serious as he's making it. Because honestly, if he can't handle a small joke like this, what does that say about us? Update. Hi Reddit. I'll admit, some of your comments have given me a bit of a wake-up call, though the criticism has been tough to take. I'm starting to see that, okay, maybe I'm not completely blameless here, but it's also not as if this whole mess is entirely my fault. Sure, I made a few jokes, but it was my friends who went and told him, making it all blow up. If they hadn't spread it around, maybe none of this would have happened. I can't believe a little joke has spiraled to this point. Things are really escalating, and I feel completely lost. My so-called friends? They're calling me selfish, and even throwing around terms like narcissist. We had a major argument the other day after we went through the comments on my original Reddit post. I'll admit it, reading some of those comments felt like taking a hit. The criticism was harsh, sometimes even vicious, and way beyond what seemed fair. So I spoke up, calling it absurd. But the moment I did, my friends were on me, accusing me of making it all about myself again. They said this was typical me, always defending myself, never really seeing the full impact of my actions. It feels as if they expect me to just accept these random judgments from people online, to nod along as if every stranger's opinion about me is gospel truth. Seriously? I can't wrap my head around how one joke and my response to it somehow morphed into a complete teardown of my character. But here I am, facing exactly that. It escalated almost instantly. My friends started rattling off a list of things they claim make me self-absorbed. How I'm always the focus, how my apologies lack sincerity, how I'm apparently oblivious to how my words land on others. It's frustrating because, from my perspective, making one mistake shouldn't erase everything else about who I am or paint me as some kind of villain. Now, it's as if every comment I make or action I take is scrutinized and turned against me, with people ready to pounce at any moment. Some friends have pulled away entirely, and others are outright confrontational. It feels like a betrayal of the deepest kind. How could people who called themselves friends turn on me so quickly? It's as if they never really knew me. I feel abandoned, misjudged, hurt, and completely alone in a way that's hard to describe. Yes, I've made mistakes, but this whole ordeal feels horribly unfair. To top it off, here's the current nightmare I'm facing. Levi, my husband, has thrown me out, and it's like he's determined to make life unbearable. He's cut me off financially, knowing full well that I don't have any savings to rely on. But he didn't stop there. He's actively undermining my career. My job depended heavily on my reputation, and he's managed to make me look so unreliable that I was let go. As if that wasn't enough, he's even shared private voice messages I sent him with our family and friends. Now everyone sees me as this heartless villain. Imagine that? He's completely humiliated me, shattered my reputation, and now even my own family thinks of me as cold, disrespectful, and cruel. He's turned them all against me, leaving me entirely isolated. Losing my job hit hard, especially because, while it wasn't a big paycheck, it was something I could have depended on now that I'm cut off financially. But he took that away too. With each passing day without an income, I'm one step closer to having nothing. It honestly feels like he's out to destroy me, and I can't understand how it's come to this. I've tried to explain my side, to make peace, but no one's willing to listen. My voice has been drowned out in the chaos he's stirred up. Sure, I accept that I played a role in all this, but Levi's actions feel deliberate, like he's set on stripping me of everything. I can barely believe this is where I am now, and I don't even know what to do next. Update. Hello, Reddit. I didn't expect this level of anger in the comments. Some of you seem to revel in tearing people down, don't you? And as I've pointed out time and again, this mess isn't entirely my fault. Everyone seems determined to cast me as the sole villain here, but that's simply not true. Yes, I made mistakes, but I didn't orchestrate this whole mess alone. It was a joke gone wrong, and somehow that's made me out to be the worst person alive. For those asking where I'm staying now, no, I'm not out on the streets, no matter how much some people might like to think so. I'm staying with my parents, and it's hardly a perfect solution. And yes, I still have bills and rent piling up, so it's not exactly a cushy situation. This is exhausting, to put it mildly. Right now, getting through each day feels nearly insurmountable. I'm struggling immensely, and yet it seems like no one notices, much less cares. Amid this, my phone and email have been bombarded with spam, endless emails, bizarre texts, and calls from unknown numbers. None of it makes sense, and it started to feel like someone's targeting me. Blocking the numbers was useless. They just kept coming, like a relentless wave crashing down on me, adding to the weight I already carry. This torrent of spam was maddening, and it felt like there would be no end to it. Throughout the day, my phone never stopped buzzing. Emails, strange calls, nonsensical messages. Blocking one source only led to another popping up. It was exhausting, and every notification made my stomach sink. I would pick up the phone, hoping it might be a normal call, only to hear an unfamiliar voice or see an incomprehensible message on the screen. My inbox became a jumbled mess, cluttered with bizarre and even hostile emails mixed with nonsense. It was as if someone were deliberately trying to unsettle me, and to think it all started as a single harmless joke. In desperation, I finally changed my phone number, hoping it would stop the chaos, but it didn't. When the spam continued, even after changing both my phone number and my Gmail, I began to think it might not be random. It started to feel personal, as though someone wanted to push me to my limits. Eventually, I wondered if Levi, or maybe someone else in our group, might be behind it or had at least played some part in it. It felt orchestrated, almost like an attack. Changing my number was no easy task. It meant updating my bank accounts and countless other services. But even after all that trouble, the spam somehow still found me. Every time I thought it was over, I'd have to change my number yet again. It was maddening, leaving me to wonder how they kept getting my new contact info. This felt like a punishment with no way out. And then, when I went back to what was once our home to gather my things, I discovered he'd already thrown them out. Clothes, keepsakes, sentimental items, gone. Apparently, he'd texted me to pick them up, but in the chaos, I missed the messages. So he'd tossed everything. Losing all those pieces of my past, those cherished memories, was like another wound on top of everything else unraveling. And as if that weren't enough, people now see me as the villain. I have no one reaching out, no support. Friends have drifted away, family seems to look at me with distrust, and I'm left feeling completely alone. And then, just when I thought I'd hit rock bottom, I was served divorce papers. It's official, and on top of all that's happened, I now have to confront the reality of divorce. The very thought is overwhelming, knowing I'll have to navigate the legal process while somehow piecing my life back together. Is this really how everything is supposed to fall apart? All of this just because of one innocent joke about a voice? I can't believe how fast everything has collapsed. One moment I was laughing with friends, and in what feels like an instant, I'm facing divorce, losing everything that once mattered. It feels surreal, like a nightmare I can't wake up from. I didn't cheat, I didn't lie, all I did was make a joke. And now, I'm left drowning in isolation. Friends who used to care act as if I no longer exist. They've rallied around my husband as if they've forgotten I'm still here, hurting too. I understand they're trying to support him, but the way they've turned their backs on me so quickly cuts deeply. I'm not some kind of monster, but that's exactly how they make me feel. Now, all I can do is try to rebuild, while struggling against shame, judgment, and the constant reminder of how much I've lost. And through all this, I'm out there, searching for a job, trying to put the pieces of my life back together. My reputation lies in ruins, and any sense of self-confidence I once had feels utterly shattered. Trying to piece my life back together feels like a mountain too high to climb, especially with everyone around me convinced I'm the villain in this story. It's like I'm trapped at the bottom of a dark pit. Every attempt to rise is met with a force pulling me back down. I never wanted things to spiral out of control like this, and I'm exhausted from trying to prove that I'm not the monster they think I am. I just want the chance to explain myself, to show that I'm capable of growth and change, that I can be better. But at this moment, it seems like no one is interested in hearing my side. So I'm here on Reddit again, hoping for some genuine advice. Where do I even start in cleaning up this mess when everyone around me seems so eager to condemn? My marriage feels like it's slipping away, and every effort I make to save it just seems to drive it further out of reach. I feel completely lost. And to those who take pleasure in watching me struggle, well, congratulations, I suppose. If you're only here to criticize, just know that I'm acutely aware of how bad things have gotten. Your words can't make me feel any worse than I already do. Update. Hey Reddit, it's been a while since I posted here, and honestly, I nearly forgot about it. I only remembered when setting up a new account, realizing I already had one. That probably says something about where my mind's been lately. Anyway, I've received a lot of messages asking for an update, so here it is, though it's far from the happy ending I'd hoped for. Here's where things stand. The divorce is final. It was shockingly fast, over in less than an hour in court. With no children and no shared finances, it was just done. Just like that. I didn't qualify for any kind of support, which stung, but the real blow was the realization that this truly was the end. I had crossed the last line. There was no turning back. I tried everything, letters, voicemails, even showing up in person, but he wouldn't speak to me. He completely shut me out, denying me any second chance. It left me feeling desperate then, and honestly, I still do. If I could go back, I would undo everything, undo how I acted. I grew up in a family where teasing was our way of expressing affection. It was our love language. But now I realize that what I did to my husband was far from harmless. It was actually mocking. And it wasn't just occasional, it was constant. In my original post, I framed it as lighthearted teasing. But looking back, I see that I was tearing him down, humiliating him, undermining him far more often than I'd been willing to admit. Facing that truth is painful. After everything fell apart, I spiraled into a deep depression. I lost my job, and my family cut me off, saying they were done listening to my complaints. That hurt in ways I can't even begin to describe. The final blow came when they took my ex's side, openly welcoming his new girlfriend, leaving me feeling completely erased. It's isolating to see people who were supposed to care for me turn away, leaving me totally alone. Since then, I've spent a lot of time in reflection, and that's a big reason I'm writing this update. I see now that I had a serious issue with accountability. I constantly wanted to justify my actions, to make excuses, to shift the blame. And while part of me still feels like it wasn't entirely my fault, I'm not saying I'm blameless. I probably crossed lines I didn't see. Maybe I was too harsh. But I didn't think at the time that it was enough to destroy a marriage. Yet, here I am, dealing with the consequences. Now, my situation is bleak, to put it mildly. I'm bouncing from place to place, just trying to find somewhere to sleep each night. My career? That's a joke at this point. Every attempt to restore my reputation has ended in disaster. People avoid me, and whenever I try to explain my side, they look at me like I'm some kind of villain. Every door I approach seems to slam shut in my face. Not only am I without a husband, but without friends, too. None of them seem willing to give me a second chance. It's maddening that I can't even share my perspective without being judged or dismissed. And to add to the humiliation, my ex has moved on and appears to be serious about his new girlfriend. I can't lie, it's deeply humiliating. I still find myself slipping into the habit of scrolling through his social media. I'm fully aware that I shouldn't be doing it, but some part of me just won't stop. Seeing him happy in those photos fuels this ache inside me, like I'm the one left behind with nothing to show. Sometimes I even end up on his new girlfriend's page and, though it's childish, I can't help but dislike her. Lately, it seems like the only way forward might be to leave this place altogether. What's left for me here? My reputation is in ruins. Nobody wants to hire me, and I'm seen as the one who threw her own life away. Staying here feels pointless. I'm just scraping together what I can to afford a fresh start somewhere new, hoping that a change of scenery might actually help. For now, though, I'm just trying to get through each day. I'm stuck financially, my friends have disappeared, my family has given up on me, and I feel completely spent. Saying I've hit rock bottom feels almost like an understatement. I've done my share of soul-searching, but it hasn't changed the reality I'm in. The consequences are still right here with no clear way out. This is where I am. Everything feels out of control, and honestly, I have no clue what's coming next.
This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started.
Mateo discarded our wedding rings after I teased him lightly at a small gathering we held with our closest friends just before the big day. Hi, I'm Riley, 32 and a chef, and I'm in desperate need of advice. My wedding is set for 4 days from now, but my fiancé Mateo has vanished completely. No calls, no messages. He's even blocked me on every possible way I could reach him. Last time I saw him was at that gathering, where he abruptly stormed off, announcing he was done, and in a fit of anger, threw our rings out of the window. We had planned this event together, deciding to skip the separate bachelor and bachelorette parties for a joint, relaxed celebration with our friends. We wanted to avoid any drama, just a peaceful time together before the wedding. To keep things low stress, I scheduled the gathering a week ahead, hoping it would be a relaxed chance for us to enjoy each other's company before the wedding rush. But here I am, only days before the ceremony, completely in the dark about Mateo's whereabouts or what he's thinking. I love him so deeply, and the thought of losing him is unbearable. I'm at a loss, but I'm determined to find a way to make things right. At the party, I made a few innocent jokes about Mateo with my friends. At first, he laughed along, but then, without warning, his mood soured, and he stormed off. Not long after, he returned, walked straight to our room, grabbed our wedding rings, and hurled them out the window, declaring the wedding was off. He even suggested that the teasing wasn't the real issue, that there were deeper problems. Our friends were stunned, and I felt like they were judging me, leaving me mortified. But the party wasn't the only issue. Recently, Mateo discovered something from my past that I'd kept hidden, something I never thought would resurface. Now that he knows, it feels like it's threatening everything we've built together. I'm devastated and terrified that the future we planned together is falling apart. Mateo and I met in such an unexpected way. He came into my restaurant one day during my lunch break. My team was out and I was taking a quiet moment reading a recipe book when he wandered in, looking tired and hungry. Although we were technically closed, I decided to cook him a meal. He had this kind, genuine vibe, and honestly, he was incredibly attractive. I couldn't say no. After he finished eating, my team came back, and he realized he'd interrupted my break. He apologized repeatedly and offered to take me to lunch to make up for it. Sweetly, he suggested coming back to my restaurant for that lunch. True to his word, he showed up the next day, and we shared a meal together. Right away, we clicked. I felt like I could be open in a way I rarely am with someone I just met. At the end of lunch, he asked for my number, though he didn't call that night, leaving me to wonder if he'd ever reach out. When he finally did, 2 days later, we ended up talking for hours, sparking a close friendship. After a month of getting to know each other, that friendship blossomed naturally into something deeper. We were inseparable, introducing each other to friends and spending weekends together whenever my restaurant was closed. Now, though, it feels like everything is unraveling. I'm here, hoping for some kind of miracle, anything that might help Mateo see my side. But right now, I just don't know how to reach him. Mateo serves as an executive director in his family's company, a business now helmed by his younger brother, Peter. What's truly impressive is how well they get along despite sharing the same workplace. There's no friction or competition between them. They respect each other's boundaries and responsibilities without any struggle for authority. It surprised me to learn that Peter, and not Mateo, had assumed the CEO role. When I asked Mateo why he hadn't taken the top spot, he simply explained that he'd never felt drawn to lead the family business. Mateo shared that he remained in his role because his father had asked him to stay, but he appreciated that, as a director, he had the freedom to leave any time. His relaxed approach puzzled me. I'd always believed that if you took on a responsibility, you should aim to excel at it. However, Mateo appeared content, comfortable with where he stood, and I realized my reasoning wouldn't change his mind. I made several attempts to persuade him, but Mateo was unyielding once he'd made a decision. Reflecting on my own choices, I realize I've always had a streak of rebellion. At 17, I left home instead of attending college and haven't returned, not even to visit my parents. As their only child, they adored me and had clear ideas about my future. They expected me to enroll in a respected college and eventually become a doctor. They even tried compromising, allowing me to choose my college and major. But when I revealed my true ambition to attend culinary school and become a chef, they were horrified. My parents argued that a career as a chef would be too difficult and financially unstable. When I realized they wouldn't come around, I made the painful choice to leave. I was barely an adult, with only the money I had taken from them, and facing the world alone was harder than I'd imagined. Until then, every step I'd taken had been under their guidance. I sold nearly all my belongings to survive until, luckily, a friend took me in. Her family questioned me about my background, and I fabricated a story, saying my parents had passed away and that an uncle had tried to place me as a maid for a wealthy man. They sympathized, and I was grateful to find a place in Princess's family. I eventually got a part-time job to save a little money. Before long, Princess's brother Carter became my first boyfriend, and living under the same roof allowed us to explore a relationship discreetly. He was my first experience in romance, teaching me about intimacy, though he was far more experienced. His family saw him as saintly, preparing for the seminary, unaware of his secret life. When his family discovered our relationship, their anger was immediate, and I took all the blame, which left me back on the streets. This time, I had saved just enough to rent a tiny room. It was cold, damp, and leaked during rain, with no proper bedding, but it was all I could afford. I found work as a waitress at a club, though the attire was far more revealing than I was comfortable with. By 20, with a mature appearance, I sometimes engaged in intimate exchanges for money, not out of desire but necessity. It astonished me how much people would pay, and it allowed me to slowly improve my circumstances. Eventually, I saved enough to move to a better apartment, and finally, to fund my culinary training. After earning my certification and saving enough to launch my own business, I found myself still caught in a familiar cycle, seeking out men, often older, as an easy source of money. I could have stopped, I knew that, but I'd grown too comfortable with the financial ease it provided. Then I met Dylan. He was wealthy, a bit eccentric, and we met at a club where I'd often go to find potential benefactors. Though Dylan wasn't significantly older than me, his wealth was substantial, and he made me an offer. He wanted me as his exclusive mistress. I agreed, seeing in him a chance to indulge in even more luxury. Within just 2 weeks, Dylan lavished me with enough money that I could buy a house and open my business. But along with his generosity came a darker side, his controlling tendencies and volatile temper. Whenever he found any lingering messages from past men on my phone, His anger spiraled into violence. He would beat me until I was left bruised and bleeding, and afterward, he would force himself on me, as though my pain intensified his need. Each time, he'd eventually apologize, trying to compensate for the trauma with gifts and more money. Though I feared these episodes, I stayed, convincing myself that this lifestyle was worth the cost. Our relationship lasted 3 months, ending with a night that nearly became fatal. A man at a club winked at me, triggering Dylan's violent jealousy. He dragged me home and beat me with a savagery I'd never experienced before, assaulting me repeatedly through the night. I fainted twice. By dawn, I knew I had to leave. When he rushed out for an emergency at work, I found my way to a hospital. After getting treated, I hid from him, ignoring the threatening messages he kept sending. Thankfully, he had no knowledge of the secluded house I'd purchased, so he couldn't track me down. 2 months later, his messages ceased, and I finally felt a measure of freedom. I threw myself into my business, buying equipment, hiring staff, and slowly gaining a local reputation. Although the restaurant eventually became well known in the area, I refused to expand, wary that increased visibility might somehow bring Dylan back into my life. I made weekends my personal retreat, keeping my distance from the restaurant while the staff managed operations. Meeting Mateo was a fresh beginning, and I resolved to keep my past with Dylan a secret. I wanted Mateo to know only the person I'd crafted so carefully, not the one shaped by painful memories. I even kept my real family background hidden, telling him instead that my parents had passed. I wanted nothing from my past to shadow the image he held of me as a perfect partner. Mateo and I shared 2 years together before he proposed. Throughout our relationship, he was a kind and supportive boyfriend, always attentive to my happiness, though I was fully capable of taking care of myself. He surprised me with fun outings, and I treasured these moments with him. Mateo urged me to expand the restaurant, but I hesitated, claiming I was satisfied with its current state. Though he seemed curious, he eventually let it go. Our first serious disagreement came at a charity fundraiser hosted by his father's company, an event they held annually to benefit orphanages. The room was filled with wealthy patrons, more eager to show off their generosity than genuinely support the cause. Yet, regardless of their intentions, the funds raised made a meaningful difference for orphaned children throughout the country. When Mateo invited me to be his guest at the event, I declined, not out of lack of interest, but because I dreaded the chance of encountering Dylan, who'd likely be among the wealthy attendees. Mateo grew frustrated by my repeated refusals, each excuse sounding weaker than the last. In the end, he declared he'd bring his assistant, a woman whose presence always unnerved me. She seemed to have an obvious interest in Mateo, which irked me each time I saw them together. Despite my pleas for him to keep her away from his personal life, he'd explained that his father had hired her, and without a valid reason, her position was secure due to her proficiency. My frustration got the better of me, and in an outburst, I accused him of seeking an excuse to be unfaithful, which sparked a tense argument. Eventually, I gave in, deciding I'd rather attend than risk anyone mistaking her as his date. When we arrived, I was constantly on edge, scanning the crowd for Dylan, ready to duck away if I spotted him. But as the evening wore on and he didn't appear, my nerves began to settle. Mateo mistook my tension as discomfort from being around influential people I'd only seen in the media. He introduced me to a few, but soon had to excuse himself for an urgent meeting with a business partner. Left alone, I took cautious sips of champagne, careful to keep my wits about me. Just then, a man appeared beside me, tapping his glass to mine in a friendly toast. I was startled to see he looked remarkably like Mateo. Though I'd only heard of Mateo's brother, who worked abroad at their main office, I quickly realized this was him. I kept our conversation light and polite, but soon he began to flirt unabashedly. It occurred to me that he likely had no idea I was dating his brother. I was just about to correct him when Mateo reappeared, jokingly telling him to keep his distance from his girlfriend. Realizing who I was, Peter only laughed and continued his playful flirtation. I sensed a genuine attraction from Peter, though Mateo seemed to think it was all in good fun. I figured it was a one-time thing and didn't expect to see Peter again after the event, but I was mistaken. He showed up at my restaurant the following week, and his flirtations were even bolder. I told him directly that I was committed to Mateo and didn't appreciate his advances, yet he wasn't discouraged. Soon, Peter began sending flowers to my restaurant or my home each morning, each bouquet accompanied by notes praising my looks or confessing his admiration. Occasionally, he'd add lavish gifts, designer dresses, jewelry, or high-end shoes. I chose to keep it from Mateo, hoping to avoid any strain on his relationship with his brother, whom he cared deeply about. Reluctantly, I accepted Peter's gifts, and eventually he invited me to lunch. I accepted, intending to ask him to stop. However, the lunch turned out to be surprisingly enjoyable, and I found myself agreeing to another dinner. Peter was charismatic, with a way of making me feel truly beautiful. Although Mateo often complimented me, there was something unique about Peter's approach that drew me in. Gradually, our meetings became more frequent, and I began making excuses to see Peter, claiming I was too busy whenever Mateo asked. I didn't mention these meetings to Mateo, knowing he'd question why I was spending so much time with his brother. Over time, my bond with Peter deepened, and eventually, I crossed a line I hadn't intended. That night was a blur, clouded by too much wine. Peter had called, sounding vulnerable and needing company, asking if he could come over. Unable to turn him away, I agreed, and he arrived, bringing drinks with him. Our conversation flowed freely as the drinks kept coming, and before I knew it, I'd crossed the line into intoxication. The evening blurred until I had a moment of clear realization. I was lying on the bed beside Peter, both of us undressed. Desperately, I asked him to keep it secret, insisting it could never happen again, especially since I was involved with his brother. Peter agreed, and for a week he kept his distance. But soon he was back, suggesting we continue with no strings attached, pointing out that I wasn't married to his brother yet. I gave in. I know it was reckless, and I struggled to explain my actions. I loved Mateo deeply, and I was certain I felt nothing for Peter. But somehow, I was drawn back into it. I even stopped being close to Mateo, thinking it might ease my guilt. Then, on my 28th birthday, Mateo proposed. I hadn't planned much for my birthday, just a quiet day with a cake I'd baked. But Mateo insisted on taking me out to dinner, and I finally agreed. He took care of everything. I only had to show up. When I arrived, the server placed a plate in front of me, not with food, but with the words, "Will you marry me?" written on it. My heart soared with happiness, and tears almost came to my eyes. I loved Mateo, and saying yes to him felt like my greatest dream coming true. We set the wedding for 2 months later, allowing just enough time to make it special. It was actually my suggestion, and Mateo agreed, overjoyed at the thought of our journey ending in marriage. However, Peter wasn't as thrilled when he heard the news. I brushed it off, feeling secure in my decision to marry Mateo, believing our fling was in the past. But soon, Peter began stirring up trouble, hinting at doubts and attempting to undermine my relationship with Mateo. I was furious. I told Peter I'd cut things off for good if he didn't stop interfering, and he promised to back off. Things grew even more complicated when Dylan, a mutual friend of Peter's, entered the picture. Dylan had seen us together, and Peter had apparently bragged to him about our involvement, perhaps showing off his ability to win over any woman, unaware he was creating more problems for me. I learned the full story when Dylan confronted me, threatening to reveal my secrets about Peter. Feeling trapped, I ended up sleeping with him, hoping it would keep him quiet. Juggling these situations while trying to maintain my commitment to Mateo was exhausting, but I couldn't risk him finding out. The only way to ensure their silence was to play along. Then Mateo's suspicions were aroused when he found a pair of earrings he'd given me at Peter's place. When Mateo questioned me about the earrings, I denied they were mine. He didn't press the issue, so I thought I was in the clear, until we were on our way to lunch with his parents, and he suggested I wear those same earrings. I quickly made up an excuse about wanting to wear a different pair. I'm not sure if he believed me. He seemed unconvinced, but didn't confront me. Instead, he remained unusually silent during lunch, a change even his parents noticed. Shortly afterward, Mateo began pushing Peter to date, even organizing blind dates with their mother's help. Mateo had casually mentioned to her that now that he was settling down, Peter should think about finding someone as well. Peter, who preferred casual flings, was clearly annoyed by Mateo's efforts. By this point, I suspected Peter was beginning to wonder if his brother knew more about his affairs than he let on. Mateo and I began preparing for our wedding, though it was mostly me taking charge of every detail, with him agreeing to whatever I decided. Since the incident with the earring, I'd noticed a change in him. He'd become strangely withdrawn. I didn't dare ask what was wrong, fearing a response I wasn't ready to face. At least Dylan had finally left the state, offering some peace of mind that he wouldn't be meddling in my life anymore. Still, my affair with Peter hadn't ended. I told Peter we'd have to stop seeing each other after I was married, and he agreed, saying he wasn't interested in an affair with a married woman anyway. I organized a pre-wedding celebration, inviting friends I'd kept in touch with, many from my cooking class. I planned everything meticulously to ensure the night would go off without a hitch. The day before, Mateo asked me a question out of the blue. He wanted to know my thoughts on infidelity, especially in long-term relationships. I gave the response anyone would if they wanted to avoid suspicion, telling him that I'd never stand for cheating and doubted I could forgive it if it happened. Mateo nodded, seemingly satisfied. When I asked why he was curious, he explained that a friend had confided in him, asking for advice. I felt reassured, believing his question hadn't been aimed at me. By the night of the party, I was buzzing with excitement. Ignoring Mateo's odd mood, I joined in the fun with my friends, laughing and taking part in the games. At one point, someone dared me to dance seductively with Mateo. Remembering a few moves I'd learned from a former colleague who'd been a dancer, I gave it my best shot, feeling confident. Mateo, however, just watched me, expressionless. I brushed it off, deciding I'd ask him about his mood after the party. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere lightened, and we started joking around about married life, even laughing about intimacy after marriage. One friend teasingly asked how I'd handle it if Mateo couldn't meet my needs, and joked that I could find someone who could. The room burst into laughter, all except Mateo. He sat silently, and in hindsight, I should have taken note. Foolishly, I laughed along, saying that if he ever fell short, I'd get him an assistant. The guys chuckled, but Mateo remained stone-faced. Without a word, he left the room, returned holding our wedding rings, and hurled them out the window. I stood frozen, unable to react. Mateo turned to face me, announcing to everyone that he was done with the relationship. He admitted he'd tried to overlook my lies, hoping marriage would change things because he'd loved me. But hearing me joke about infidelity had made him realize he couldn't marry someone who saw betrayal as something trivial, especially with his brother and a friend. His words left me in shock. He knew everything. It turned out Mateo had first become suspicious on a work trip when he saw someone who looked like me. That was before the earring incident, and his curiosity had led him to uncover everything. My lies about my family, the truth behind how I'd funded my business, and my affairs with his brother and my ex, Dylan. With disgust clear in his eyes, Mateo shook his head and walked away. The room filled with whispers from friends who'd overheard every word, but all I could think was that, just a week before our wedding, Mateo had left me. I was losing the only man I'd ever truly loved. It felt surreal, like a waking nightmare. I could hardly process what was unfolding. Mateo has been silent for 3 days now, shutting me out completely. Every connection I had to reach him has been severed. Fear grips me, and the thought of a future without him feels unbearable. Losing Mateo is not an option. Not now, not ever. I'm pleading for advice. How can I mend this? How do I earn his forgiveness and return to the life we planned, the wedding we dreamed of? I feel desperate. Hello, Reddit. It's painful to read the harsh words you've shared, and even harder to see the collective judgment. Saying I'm heartbroken doesn't even capture how low I feel. I knew there would be anger, but seeing the resentment directed at me cuts deeper than I imagined. No one can hate me more than I hate myself right now. Your comments are brutal, forcing me to confront my own foolishness. I convinced myself I could have it all, that I could betray Mateo, conceal the truth, and still expect to walk down the aisle. I believed he would forgive me despite the wounds I inflicted. He wedding day came and went, but here I am, still without a husband. I wore my dress, arrived at the church, and waited for him, waited until there was no one left. I returned again the next day, and then the day after that, until they had to tell me to leave. I destroyed the most beautiful part of my life. I should have been honest with Mateo from the beginning, told him everything about his brother's behavior, about Dylan's threats. Maybe then, I wouldn't be standing here alone. Maybe I'd be wearing my wedding ring right now. After searching for hours, I found the ring Mateo threw away. I loved it from the moment I saw it, but now it barely fits. Perhaps I've lost weight. I can't be sure since I've shattered all the mirrors in my home, unable to bear the sight of myself, disgusted by my own reflection. Each day, the weight of my choices presses down on me, and I regret everything. I'm truly alone now, with no one left by my side. I wish with all my heart that I hadn't hurt Mateo so deeply. I don't know what happened between Mateo and Peter after everything, but I wouldn't be shocked if they've managed to mend things. My parents? I suspect they'd rather pretend I don't exist. I left home on my own and ended up with nothing, barely surviving on the streets. I've sold my dignity just to keep going. I feel dirty, scrubbing my skin until it's raw, yet the shame and disgust remain. Despite every mistake in my past, Mateo loved me, still wanted to marry me, to build a life together, and somehow I ruined the one pure good thing in my life. The past few weeks have been a blur of sorrow and introspection. I've cried so much that I'm almost convinced my tear ducts are damaged. They never seem to stop. I feel empty, with my life now a hollow shell. My restaurant has remained closed for weeks. I've likely lost all my customers, but I can't bring myself to care. In a single moment, I lost everything of value, and now my life lies in ruins. I find myself wishing I could turn back, desperate to undo my choices. But I know these wishes are in vain. I've built my own personal hell, and the suffering feels unbearable. Sometimes I wonder if there's anything worse than this existence. Perhaps this life is my punishment, my own version of hell. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's me, one last time. This will likely be my final post here. I just wanted to say thank you. Though the responses were filled with anger, they offered me something real, a mirror to my actions, helping me understand the depths of what I've done. At least now, there's something other than the heavy silence that clings to me everywhere I go. My life hasn't taken a turn for the better. It remains as dark and empty as ever. Mateo is still gone, leaving everything else in my world feeling hollow and meaningless. I keep punishing myself in my mind, replaying every wrong choice, every moment I could have done better. I can't escape this endless cycle of self-loathing. Whoever said time heals all wounds had no clue about my reality. Each day only seems to deepen the hurt. It's as if my chest is bound in an unyielding vice, an ache that never relents. Facing each new day means facing a world without Mateo, and it's almost unbearable. Even in sleep, I'm haunted by the gentle memories of him, by all the future we'll never have. The pain is sharper because I know that I'm the one responsible for it. I've accepted that I may never find peace within myself. This burden of guilt is mine alone to carry, likely for the rest of my life. And although it feels like a prison sentence, I'm willing to bear it if it could, in some impossible way, ease even a fragment of the hurt I've caused him. Someday, I know he'll move forward, build a life with someone who isn't me. Just the thought of it sends shockwaves through me, triggering panic I can hardly control. This is the torment I've crafted for myself, and I'm left wondering, is there any escape from this self-made hell?
This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.